Hi, everybody. Well, today is the 16th, so we're just past the middle point of March. Woo! And I, March being, of course, Women in Horror Month, I've been trying to catch up on some of the books that I've had kicking around for a while. And the one that I got through, just finished it literally just now, Dark Matter by Michelle Paver. And this is really good. Very highly recommended. It's a story, it's told as a series of diary entries by a fellow named Jack, who is British, and he's got these friends who are very privileged Oxford guys, and they decide they're going to go on an expedition to the Arctic and just data recording things, weather, and they invite him to go along. And at first he's a little bit annoyed and offended because, he's like they're kind of the poor guy that they just sort of invite because he's there. But then he starts to think, yeah, this could be interesting. So they get all their supplies together and they go out, and a couple of them don't make it to the expedition. They have to stay home. By the end of it, it's just the three of them. And Jack, the main character, is keeping a diary, and he and the other two guys are getting along for a while, but then one of them gets sick, and so they said, we'll be back a couple weeks, just hold down the fort, keep doing what you're doing. But all along, there's been a hint that things aren't quite right in the state of Gerhucken, and maybe he shouldn't be there by himself. And this starts with the ship's captain that takes them there, and he's like, do you really want to stay? Because, you have time to leave. But the darker and the colder it gets, because they are way north of the Arctic, the more entrenched, I guess, trapped Jack gets. So this was there was a lot of really good creepy stuff. Very suspenseful, and the kind of creeping, dready horror that I like, that isn't over the top. It's not super gory, it's not anything, but it's just something that is really, really unsettling. Excuse me. And Jack he's not drawn in very broad character strokes, but there's not a lot of detail about who he is. So he's just this sort of calm, studious English voice. He's a scientist, so he's carefully documenting everything and trying to find a rational explanation for what's going on, which is the first thing that you do in a haunting. I'm going to tell you from experience if that is indeed what was happening at my place. It's just a really good read. It's not overly long. It's only like 250 pages, and the edition, there's lots of white space, lots of big print. It's an easy read. And the author, which I found was kind of interesting, she wrote a book series called The Chronicles of Ancient Darkness, which is about a kid back in caveman times. It's about a boy and his wolf. And I think that clear, lucid, descriptive style that comes from writing children's books is one of the things that led to a very a really good style with writing this book too. The pacing is good. The characters are really well drawn, and there's a lot of detailed but simple descriptions of the Arctic itself. Now, what I think one of the things that drew me was that, Great White North, right? I don't like cold weather very much, but there is part of me that is always intrigued by the sort of how powerful nature can be. Growing up in the Great Lakes area, the best time to go to the beach for me was not in the dead of summer when everybody was there, but in January when the lake was at midnight, when the lake was angry and it was cold and it was, if you stayed there long enough, it would kill you. There was always something really exciting about that. I don't know why. I don't know. There was something morbidly exciting about that. And that's what I've always been curious about, going that far north. Just because of the things that I've heard. I had a roommate once who lived in Yellowknife, and she said that every year when the midnight sun, or when the sun goes away and it's dark for half the year, they have a festival called Raven Mad Days, or at least at the time they did. I don't know if they still do. This was back in the late 90s. And so that's one thing that I was always kind of intrigued by, that idea of the midnight sun. And the other thing that always intrigued me about the Arctic was that back when I was in university, I worked for the AV department, and one of the things that we did was videotaping the lectures. Excuse me. Now, this was in the 90s, so there was no Zoom. Our correspondence courses were on videotape at the time. So one of the lectures that I videotaped was on the Canadian Arctic. And he said that now in the Arctic, it's not like it is here, further south. Here in temperate climates, you have green everywhere. There's green grass, there's leaves, you have colors. In the Arctic, everything is brown, white, or blue. Because down here, the sun is up there. But in the Arctic, the sun is straight ahead. Whenever you're looking at the sun, it's much, much lower than it is when you're in temperate climates, because of where you are in the polar rotation. And he said that during the summertime, so the sun goes around in orbit, and he said about midnight, it's always like right there, and he says about midnight it just starts this decline, and then just before dawn it just touches the horizon, and then it goes back up. It goes around again. And that's what it does during the summertime, when it doesn't ever actually set. So the opposite, of course, is true in the wintertime, when it goes down and it doesn't come back up for another 6 months. So I was always curious about seeing that particular phenomenon. And I've also never seen the Northern Lights, even being Canadian. They have been showing much further south recently, and apparently they were somewhat visible in this area like in the last year or so, but unfortunately, Southern Ontario smog, you don't get to see all that natural phenomena. So anyway, so I'm just kind of rambling anyway, but these were the things that drew me to the story set in the Arctic. And of course, I always love a good ghost story, right? Who doesn't? And the stuff before and after, the author is very inspired by M.R. James. And if you're familiar with M.R. James's ghost stories, it's a pretty fair comparison. M.R. James is he's really good at the atmosphere and the creepy and just that really unsettling kind of stuff where you can put yourself in the characters. And this is what dark matter does, is you kind of put yourself in this feeling of isolation and dread. And is there something out there? Is it just the stillness of the natural environment? Is it just the wind? Is it and you kind of get yourself worked up just by being alone. But in this particular case, there is actually something out there. And so she uses, whether it's real life folklore or something that she created for the book, there's this sense of what happens when there's an unquiet spirit in this place, and in the place that's already deeply unsettling. So really good read. Dark Matter by Michelle Paver. As you can see, my book's kind of been through the ringer. It's all stained, and but I'm glad to have gotten another of the books that I have owned for a while, just to kind of get it off my TBR list, and highly recommended. And I will probably be back in a couple weeks for March recap, maybe. I don't know. We'll see what's going on. Other than that, not much else. I'm applying for jobs, looking at other stuff. Not a whole lot has changed. But I am keeping well, as I hope are you. Hope you're reading lots of horror. Have a great day.